Okay, here we go. So I have a new lesson for you today, and it's something that we haven't really talked much about at all this year. So I want to make sure that we learn about it before the year ends. So it's called something called POV, or point of view. And it can be thought of in a couple different ways. So I want to clarify that for you today. So I want to talk about point of view, and I have my board here. So point of view, or POV, and I want to talk about it. So point of view is the voice behind the story. All right, so it's that little voice behind the story. It is the who that is telling the story. So who is the telling of the story? Who's doing the telling of the story? So we have to think about that. So when you're looking to find out the point of view, so if I say to you, what is the point of view of this story? How are you going to figure that out? Okay, so how do you find out who is telling the story? That's important to know when you're reading a story, is who's telling this story. It makes a big difference a lot of times. I'm going to show you what I mean by that in just a minute. So in order, when you're looking for the point of view, in order to find that out, here's what you need to do. You need to figure out who is telling the story. You're going to use inferences to figure out the character's point of view. All right, and you're going to remember that depending on the point of view, who is telling the story, that the story might change. So who's telling the story? Is it one of your characters that's telling the story? So when you're going to figure out who is telling the story, you're going to use your inferences. You're going to be thinking, okay, well, it says I did this. I went up the stairs. Well, who is the I? Who are they talking about? You have to use your inferencing. You have to use what you know about the story and what you're reading to figure that out. So if it just keeps saying I, who is the I? Who are they talking about? All right, you have to use your thinking to figure that out. If it says he did this and she did that, you have to use your inferencing to figure out who they're talking about. All right, so I'm going to talk a little more about that in a minute. But this is really important because whoever's telling the story, sometimes the story might change. And I think you know that even just from your own experience. Just like when something happens, like in the cafeteria or in the gym or even in our classroom, if something happens, I sometimes ask different people to tell me the story. Because one person might tell me one thing from their point of view, and somebody else might tell me the same story, but it turns out a little bit different from somebody else's point of view. Let me show you what I mean. I was thinking about some stories that have different point of views, and I thought of this story. Everybody knows the story of the Three Little Pigs, right? They build their houses three different ways. One of them builds it out of straw, and it's not very strong, and the wolf comes and blows it down, and he goes to his brother's house who builds it out of sticks, and that's a little bit stronger, but the wolf still blows it down. And then they go to the third brother's house who builds it out of bricks, and that's the strongest, and the wolf can't get in, right? We know this story of the Three Little Pigs. And in this story, the wolf is the bad guy, right? And he's trying to eat those three little pigs. He wants those pigs for dinner because wolves eat pigs, right? So the point of view that this story is told from is from the point of view of the pigs. The pigs are telling the story, and that's their version of it. But some of you may know this story. It's the true story of the Three Little Pigs, right? And this is told from the point of view of the wolf. And he says, oh, no, you might have heard the story of the Three Little Pigs, but that's so not true. Let me tell you it from my point of view. And he says, all of that isn't true. I'm not the bad guy. All I wanted to do was borrow a cup of sugar. And I just happened to have a big bad cold. So all of that huffing and puffing and blow your house down, that wasn't me trying to get the pigs. I was just sneezing. I'm not really the bad guy. I wanted to be their friend, right? Two totally different stories, all right? The same idea, the same house is being blown down, the same characters are in the story. But in this one, the wolf's the bad guy. And in this one, he's not. Two stories told by different point of views, completely different. Okay? So that's one way to look at the point of view, is who's telling the story. and their opinion might be different. So I'm imagining if we were telling the story of Mason Buttle, and that story was told from the point of view of Mason Buttle. He told that story, and we learned his side of that story. I wonder how different that would be if it was told from the bully's point of view. I wonder if it would be totally different, right? What would he say, right? Or if we were looking at Suds and Joey, I wonder, we learned that story from Sud's point of view. I wonder if it would be a different story if Joey told the story, right? So that's one way of looking at point of view. There's another way we're going to look at it, and this is kind of the more technical side of it. There's a name for who's telling the story. So I want to teach you about the name. And you've probably heard this, but I want to make sure that you really understand this. There's something called first person, second person, and third person. And I want to teach you about those. So I'm going to turn you around and show you some cards on my desk to teach you about first person, second person, and third person when it comes to point of view. All right, so I'm going to turn you around and show you those. All right, give me just a second to turn you around. You know, this always takes me just a second to do. Okay, I'm going to lower you down. First I have to lower you, make you shorter. And then I have to tip you down. Tip. All right, so you can see my cards. Okay. All right, so here's the first one that I have. The first person point of view is when one of the characters is telling you the story. So if somebody in the book is telling the story, that's called first person. One of the characters. You're going to know that because there's going to be clue words like I, me, my, our, and we. So if a character is telling the story, they're going to say, I did this or that, or me and my friends, or my bedroom, or our puppy, or we did this. You're going to see those kinds of words. So that's the first person. It's a first-hand account of what's happening. You're hearing it right from the person telling the story. That's first person account. So that's first person. Now I'm going to jump right to third person because first person and third person, they're the ones that we use most often. These are the ones you're going to hear most of the time. Third person is when a narrator or the author is telling the story. So this is when the author, or if you're writing the story, you say something like, he did this, she did this, her, they, them. So this is when you tell a story about somebody else. Okay, so this is called third person. It's somebody who's not in the story is telling about it, and you're telling about somebody else. It's called third person. Those are the two that you're most often going to see. First person, right in the book, or third person, a narrator or an author telling the story. Okay? The other one, the second person, this one we don't see very often, but I want to show it to you anyway, because everybody's always like, well, what about the second person? Why do we always skip that one? This is when the narrator addresses the reader personally and talks right to the reader. And you're going to see things like you or your. So it says, you should do this, or your puppy did this. So this is kind of like when you write a note to somebody. This is second person. So the narrator talks right to whoever is reading the writing. All right, I'm going to give you an example and show you what I mean in just a second. All right, so first person, the person in the book, one of the characters is talking. Third person, the narrator is telling the story. And third person, the narrator is talking to the reader. All right, I'm going to give you some examples. Here's a first person example. All right, here's a first person example. Okay, so first person point of view is told from a first-hand account. There's those keywords again, I, me, us, or we. So here's an example. The ground was completely covered with snow. My sister and I couldn't wait to put our coats and grab the sleds from the garage. Come on, hurry, Karen shouted. We don't want to miss a minute. I'm hurrying, I replied. After playing in the snow for a while, we came inside and Mom made us hot chocolate. As she handed me a cup, I cautiously sipped the hot liquid and thought, what a perfect snow day this is turning out to be. So you can hear there's one character, you can hear Karen shouted, right? I don't want to miss a minute. I'm hurrying, I replied. Well, who is I? I is the narrator. That's the person who is telling the story. Okay, so that's first person. I, me, us, we. All right, so that's the person that's in the story is telling the story. I'm going to jump to that third person again to give you that example because this one's more popular. So the third person is told from an outside perspective or someone who isn't in the story. So this is that narrator. Katie and Paige couldn't believe their luck. They had a huge history test that they had forgotten to study for on the very same day that 3 inches of snow covered the ground. Luckily, a snow day had rescued them from a bad grade. So, 2 characters, Katie and Paige. There's no I in there. There's a he, she, they, right? Them. Both the characters are in there. Somebody's telling you the story about these 2 girls. All right, that's the third person. All right, here's that tricky second person that you don't see very often. All right, so this is as if you were telling the story and you're talking to the reader. It's like a teacher is leaving a note. I'll be absent tomorrow, class, and you'll have a sub. Please remember to be on your best behavior. You will need to bring your reading books to class. You will work on page 20, and if you don't finish in class, it is for homework. Be good. See how the teacher, whoever wrote this note, is talking right to whoever's reading the note, which is the class? So this is called second person. All right, we're going to do a little practicing on that on IXL today. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. If I can, I'll see if I can get you on here. So you're going to go to IXL. We're going to go to point of view G1. All right, and you're going to get a sentence that says, which point of view does the narrator use in the passage? His name was Charlie Laird, and he lived in Cypress Creek all 12 years of his life. He and his little brother Jack had grown up in a house just down the street. In fact, Charlie could see the old place from his new bedroom window. So what does that sound like? Does that sound like that there is the person who's in the story is talking about it, which would be first person, one of the characters? Does it sound like second person, where they're talking to the audience? Or does it sound like third person, where a narrator is talking? Yeah, it's third person, a narrator is talking. And that's going to give it to you. So you're going to read a little passage and decide if it's first, second, or third person. All right? That's your IXL for today. All right, guys. Talk to you tomorrow.